The wind of Red Hollow carried more dust than mercy that morning. It swept across the empty street, rattling the broken sign of the saloon, whispering through the hollow bones of a town that had forgotten how to pray. The sun hung low and red, bleeding over the mesas like a wound that would not heal. Dogs barked once, then hid beneath porches. Folk stayed inside, shutters drawn, eyes peering through cracks. They knew trouble's sound when it came, hooves like thunder rolling from the southern ridge. Martha Coyle stepped out of her cabin with a bucket in one hand, her shawl drawn tight around shoulders that had carried too much weight. She was near 60 now, though she looked older, the desert having carved her face like dry riverbeds through stone. Her hands were steady, but her heart wasn't. She felt it before she heard it, the vibration under her boots, the dust pluming on the horizon. Men were coming, not riders bringing mail or hope, but the Dawson riders, and wherever they rode, something burned. They entered town like a storm without rain. 10 of them, rough men draped in leather and cruelty, their laughter sharp as glass. At their head was Clay Dawson, a man whose face could have been handsome if hate hadn't eaten the softness out of it. His brother had hung 3 winters ago for killing a marshal, and he'd been carving vengeance out of the frontier ever since. Martha didn't flinch when they halted in front of her cabin. The leader dismounted slowly, spurs biting the earth. "Morning, Miss Coyle," Clay drawled, his grin as dry as the dust between them. "Heard you been hiding men with badges under your roof. Federal kind." She looked him dead in the eye. "You heard wrong." Clay tilted his head, amused. "You sure about that?" "Because my brother was hunted by them law dogs right round these parts. Some say a woman fed them. Some say she was a Coyle." The bucket slipped from her fingers, water spilling into the thirsty ground. She didn't answer. That was her mistake. The silence was as good as guilt to men like Clay Dawson. "Get her," he said. They pulled her by the arm, ignoring her cries as chickens scattered and the bucket rolled away. The townsfolk began to appear, drawn by fear, not courage. A few men lingered in doorways, hats in their hands. No one spoke. No one moved to stop them. Red Hollow had lost its sheriff 2 months back, and with him, its spine. They dragged Martha through the street toward the old oak in front of the saloon. It stood tall, gray, and half dead, its limbs reaching for the sun like twisted fingers begging for rain. Clay tossed a coil of rope to one of his men. "We'll give her a dance she won't forget." Martha stumbled, fell to her knees, but when they yanked her back up, her eyes were fierce, steel under years of sorrow. "You think Hange and me'll bring him back?" she rasped. "You think your brother's ghost'll rest for that?" Clay's smirk faded for just a moment. "No, ma'am," he said softly, "but I'll sleep better." They looped the rope over a branch that had hanged better men, and the crowd began to murmur. Some pleaded in whispers. Others turned away, ashamed. The world had gone quiet except for the flap of the saloon doors and the lazy drone of flies. A young man, barely 20, stepped forward from the crowd. "Clay, she ain't done nothing," he said. "She's old, she's harmless." Clay backhanded him, so hard he dropped to the ground. "Harmless? Her son killed 3 men with his bare hands. Ain't nothing harmless about that bloodline." The words hung heavier than the noose itself. The son, Elias Coyle, the giant drifter. No one had seen him in 5 years. Some said he worked the mines in Colorado. Others swore he wandered the deserts, fighting railmen and bounty hunters. But everyone remembered what he'd done when he was young. The night he dragged 2 outlaws out of a burning barn and snapped their necks like twigs after they'd shot his father. The legend had outgrown the man, and in time, even the memory of his face blurred into myth. Clay tightened the noose around Martha's neck. "Maybe this'll draw him out," he said, grinning. "Maybe the giant still remembers how to come home." She didn't beg, didn't cry. Her lips trembled once, then steadied. "You want my boy. You'll wish you hadn't." Clay laughed. "You tell him that when you see him in hell." He kicked the barrel out from under her feet. The rope went taut, groaning against a branch. The townsfolk gasped, but before her body could fall, the world exploded. A single gunshot cracked through the air, echoing across the canyon like thunder waking the dead. Clay froze. The rope snapped clean in two. frayed by a bullet that had found it from somewhere beyond sight. Martha dropped to her knees, coughing, clawing at her throat. The rider spun, scanning the ridgelines. All they saw was sunlight glinting off the red rock. Then another shot rang out. This one tore the hat clean off a man's head, set it spinning into the dirt. "Up there!" someone shouted. But when they turned, there was nothing. Only the heat haze rising over the distant rim and the silhouette of a horse standing motionless against the light. It was huge, a dark figure etched against the gold of the setting sun, and on its back sat a rider tall as the sky itself, his coat trailing like a shadow. Clay felt something twist in his gut. He squinted, but the glare blinded him. "Who the hell?" An old man, near the general store, whispered. "It's him, the Coil boy. Lord have mercy, it's Elias." No one moved. No one breathed. The stories had always said he was a mountain of a man, 6.5 feet tall, strong enough to lift a steer, quiet as smoke, and mean as a winter storm when crossed. They said he carried no badge, owed no man, and walked the earth like he was searching for something already buried. The wind carried a sound down from the ridge, a slow, steady clop of hooves on stone. The giant was coming. Clay snapped out of his daze, fury blotting out fear. "Get your rifles," he barked. "I want him alive long enough to watch her swing." Martha tried to rise, but her knees buckled. The dust was thick in her throat, her hands trembling as she reached for the broken rope at her feet. "Elias," she whispered, though she didn't know if he could hear her. "Don't do it, son. Don't come back to this hell." But the horizon had already answered. The rider descended the ridge in silence, each hoofbeat measured, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock counting down to judgment. His hat brim shadowed his face, but the outline of his shoulders was unmistakable, broad, solid, unmoving, the kind of strength born not of pride, but of purpose. The Dawson riders fanned out, weapons drawn, though the unease in their eyes betrayed them. Clay spat in the dirt. "Ain't no ghost scares me," he muttered, raising his rifle. The rider came closer until the town could see the lines of his face, a face carved by sun and solitude, eyes the color of gunmetal, jaw rough with days of travel. Dust covered his long coat, and tied across his saddle was an axe older than any of them, the blade polished like silver. The air seemed to tighten around him as he slowed to a stop in the middle of the street. Elias dismounted without a word. The earth seemed to shudder under his boots. Elias Coil rode through the canyon like a storm that had been waiting years to break. The sun was dipping low, throwing streaks of red light across the cracked rock, and every hoofbeat from his scarred black horse echoed like judgment rolling down from heaven. His coat, long and tattered, swayed behind him like a dark flag. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, but nothing could hide the hardness carved into his face, the kind of hardness born from loss and miles of dust. He hadn't meant to return to Red Hollow. Not ever. The world had taken too much from him here. A father buried before his time, a child had burned away, and a mother left behind in a town that forgot how to care. He drifted for years afterward, chasing rail lines and danger, breaking men who needed breaking. He'd been called enforcer, outlaw, hero. None of it had ever mattered. But when the telegraph in his gut whispered that something was wrong, he'd turned his horse toward home. He arrived as the gunfire faded into silence. The street was smoke and dust. The rope still swayed from the oak tree, empty now, its frayed end fluttering like a curse in the wind. Martha Coil lay on her knees beneath it, hands trembling, eyes wide and wet with disbelief that she still drew breath. Around her, 10 men stood frozen, rifles in hand, faces pale under their grit. Elias swung down from his saddle without a word. The town's breath seemed to stop altogether. He walked through the street like a mountain set in motion, each step slow, deliberate, and heavy. The spurs at his boots barely whispered. When his mother saw him, her lips parted, a soundless prayer escaping before she could speak his name. He didn't look at her yet. His eyes were on Clay Dawson. Clay spat in the dirt to hide his unease. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "The giant walks." Elias said nothing. He reached for the rope, untied it from the branch, and slipped it gently off his mother's neck. The gesture was calm, almost tender, but the quiet that came with it was worse than any gunfire. It was the quiet of a man who'd already made up his mind about how the next few hours would end. "Thought you were dead," Clay muttered. Elias glanced up then, his eyes dark and sharp as a hawk's. "You'll wish I was." Clay's smile faltered. He motioned to his men. "Shoot him." The first outlaw hesitated, just a breath, but enough. He fired from the hip, and the rifle's crack tore through the dust. The bullet never reached its mark. Elias moved like something unholy, stepping aside as the shot grazed air. His hand shot out, grabbed the barrel, and twisted. The metal shrieked, then snapped in two as if it were kindling. The outlaw stared, slack-jawed, before Elias's fist sent him sprawling into the dirt. The others didn't fire. They couldn't. No one wanted to test the strength of the man who'd just broken a gun in his bare hands. The townsfolk, peering from behind barrels and shutters, whispered like wind through grass. "It's true," one said. "He really is the bear killer." Elias turned back to his mother. She was standing now, trembling, the marks of the rope red against her skin. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. He knelt beside her, voice low and steady. "Couldn't stay gone." For a heartbeat, the years fell away. He was that boy again, dirt on his face, a hammer in his hand, building fences beside his father before the fever took him. He remembered the graves they dug together, the sky so white it felt like God could see straight through him. He'd promised his mother that day never to lift a gun again unless justice demanded it. Now justice demanded it. He rose to his full height, towering over every man in that street. "Clay Dawson," he said, his voice carrying through the heat, calm as still water. "You got till sundown to ride out of Red Hollow. Take your men, your horses, your hate, all of it. When the sun's gone, anyone still hears going under the dirt." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Even the wind seemed to hush, waiting to see if Clay would laugh or listen. Clay's mouth twitched, but his eyes stayed locked on Elias. "You giving me orders, boy." Elias's gaze didn't waver. "I'm giving you mercy." Clay stepped closer, sneering. "You think you scare me? You think you can bury us all?" Elias didn't blink. "By sundown, we'll find out." Clay's laugh came out loud and mean, breaking the tension for just a moment. "Then we'll see how many graves a giant can dig before he falls." He turned to his men, motioning them back toward the saloon. They obeyed, though not one of them turned their back fully on Elias. Fear made their shoulders stiff. They were predators, but they'd just seen something bigger than themselves walk into their world, and they didn't know what kind of man could face death that quiet. As they disappeared into the saloon shadow, Elias helped his mother to her feet. She gripped his arm tightly, her fingers trembling. "Elias," she said softly, "don't do this. You'll bring more blood to this town. You'll bring your father's curse back with you." He met her eyes, the same blue eyes that had watched over him as a boy, that had cried the night he left, that had waited at the window every day since. "I ain't bringing blood, Ma," he said. "It's already here." He led her inside the small church on the corner, its windows broken, its pews empty except for dust and sunlight. He guided her to the back pew, where she could rest, then turned to leave. She caught his wrist before he could go. "Don't make me bury you, too." He looked down at her hand, the same hand that had once wiped his tears when he was 10 years old and had to bury a calf in the cold. "You won't," he said quietly. "Not today." Outside, the sky burned orange with late light. The shadows of the mesas stretched long and sharp across the town, like fingers closing in. Elias walked toward the blacksmith's, boots crunching in the dust. The blacksmith, a quiet man named Harlan, stood behind his forge, eyes wide. "Didn't think I'd see you again, Coyle." "Need iron," Elias said. Harlan swallowed hard, then nodded toward the rack. "Still got your father's old rifle in the back. Cleaned it once a year like you asked." Elias lifted it, checked the chamber, then rested it on his shoulder. The metal gleamed faintly in the fading sun. "Appreciate it." Harlan hesitated. "You sure this'll end the way you want?" Elias looked toward the saloon, where the Dawson riders' laughter carried faintly through the air. "Never does," he said. "But some things gotta end anyway." He stepped out into the street again, the rifle in one hand, his mother's voice echoing behind him like a ghost of gentler days. The air smelled of gun oil and dry sage. Somewhere, a church bell chimed, though no one had rung it. At the edge of town, a boy watched from the shadows, the same one who'd tried to stop Clay earlier. His voice was small but certain when he spoke. "Mr. Coyle, are you going to kill 'em all?" Elias paused. The wind caught the edge of his coat, flaring it like wings. "Only the ones who stay," he said. He walked on, each step slower, heavier. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of his boots and the ticking heartbeat of time, slipping toward sundown. Every house, every broken window, every creak of wood remembered the boy he'd been and the man he'd become to keep his promise. The sun clawed its way across the sky, a blistering white eye that refused to blink, red hollow baked beneath it, every board and shingle shimmering in the heat. The air was thick, heavy, and full of waiting, the kind of silence that came before thunder. Elias Coyle stood in that stillness, the weight of the day pressing down on his broad shoulders. He'd spent the hours since dawn preparing, slow and deliberate, like a man laying his own tombstone. On the table beside his mother's window sat a Winchester polished clean, its wood dark with years of use. Beside it, his father's axe, the blade bright as dawnlight. Around his neck hung a small silver locket, his mother's, a keepsake from before the world turned cruel. He opened it once, looking at the faded photo inside, and then closed it softly. When Martha came out from the back room, she already knew what he decided. She didn't try to change his mind. "They'll kill you, Elias," she whispered. He smiled faintly, the corner of his mouth barely lifting. "Maybe, but they won't touch you again." He led her to the church at the edge of town, the same one where he'd once been baptized under skies that promised better days. The pews were cracked, the altar half rotted, but it still felt sacred in its own lonely way. He opened the trapdoor to the cellar and helped her down the narrow steps. "Stay until it's quiet," he said. Her hand caught his sleeve, fingers trembling. "You can walk away. The desert's wide, Elias. You've done enough." He shook his head. "Not till this ends." He closed the door before she could argue, and the sound of it latching echoed like a prayer unanswered. Back in the street, the world felt different, tighter, meaner. The Dawson riders had taken over the saloon, turning it into a fortress of whiskey and arrogance. Clay Dawson sat at the window, feet on the sill, rifle across his lap, a bottle swinging from his hand. His men laughed loud enough to scare the crows from the rooftops, boasting about what they'd do when the sun went down. Elias moved like a shadow along the alleys, each step measured, quiet as falling dust. He circled behind the livery first, where the gang's horses were tied. He stroked one's mane, whispering softly before cutting the reins. The horses snorted, uneasy, and bolted into the heat. By the time the riders heard the commotion, half their mounts were gone, their escape slipping away with the pounding hooves. He worked his way along the back street, breaking lanterns with the butt of his rifle, kicking over barrels of water to turn the dust into slick mud. He didn't want a fair fight. He wanted their fear. He wanted them guessing which shadow held the giant who'd come for their souls. Inside the saloon, Clay stood and cursed, knocking over a chair. "Find him," he roared. "He's just a man." But no one moved for the door. Elias waited until the light began to change, until the gold of late afternoon deepened into that red-orange fire that made every shadow seem alive. He stepped out into the open, his coat catching the breeze, the axe strapped across his back and the Winchester hanging loose in his grip. The world seemed to hold its breath. A single church bell rang from somewhere far off, just one toll, hollow and lonely. "Dawson!" His voice rolled through town, deep and calm, like a mountain breaking loose. "It's near sundown." Clay appeared in the doorway, grinning wide to hide the tremor in his hands. "You think this is how it ends, giant? Big man, small world. Can't save it." Elias's eyes were steady. "Never wanted to. Just her." Clay's grin faltered. "Then come take your piece." The first gunshot cracked, sharp as glass. Elias ducked behind a trough, the bullet splintering wood inches from his head. He fired back once, a single, patient shot that dropped a man clean from the bell tower. The others scrambled, shouting, firing wild into the dust. Elias moved fast, reloading with the ease of habit. He slipped through doorways, across the roofs, into the narrow lanes where no light reached. The sound of his boots on what became the rhythm of the fight. 2 steps, fire, silence. Every time one of Clay's men found courage enough to shoot, Elias answered with precision. Not hate, precision. By the 6th shot, the laughter in the saloon had died. The air was filled only with the smell of gunpowder and the ringing of the wind against tin roofs. Clay's voice came again, hoarse and furious. He's just one man. He bleeds like anyone else. He wasn't wrong. Elias felt the sting of lead graze his shoulder, warm blood trickling down his sleeve. But he didn't stop. Pain had been his companion long before bullets ever were. He loaded one more round and stepped out into the street as the sun's rim kissed the mesa tops. The last of Clay's men stumbled out from behind the water barrels, shaking, eyes wide. Elias didn't lift his gun. The man dropped his weapon, backing away. I don't want this, he said, voice breaking. Then leave, Elias said. The man did. Clay was alone now. He stepped into the street, the last light of day catching the dust that clung to his boots. His rifle was steady in his hands, but the smirk was gone. You should have stayed gone, Coyle. Elias said nothing. You think killing me fixes anything? Clay sneered. You think your old man smiles down on you now? Elias's jaw tightened. My father didn't smile much. They stood 10 paces apart, the dying sun bleeding between them. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed, the sound thin and sharp. Clay raised his rifle. Elias didn't flinch. For a long moment, neither moved. Then a gust of wind swept through the street, lifting the dust, making the shadows dance. Clay fired first. The shot hit Elias high in the side, twisting him. But before Clay could chamber another round, Elias raised the Winchester and fired once. Clay's hat flew off, and he fell backward, the rifle clattering from his grip. The silence that followed was pure, heavy, final. The sun slid beneath the ridge, and the light died. The only sound was the creak of the noose, swaying from the oak. Elias dropped to one knee, breath ragged, blood soaking his shirt. He stared at the saloon doors swinging in the wind, the town around him still as stone. It was done. For a heartbeat, he believed it. Then a sound, faint but real, came from the edge of town. A horse's whinny. Footsteps. He turned his head and saw Clay crawling through the dust, dragging himself toward a saddled mare he'd kept hidden behind the troughs. The outlaw's face was pale, his grin returning through blood and dirt. Not yet, giant, Clay rasped. You can bury the others, but not me. Elias tried to rise, but the wound in his side flared like fire. He stumbled forward, hand outstretched, but Clay was already pulling himself into the saddle. The outlaw looked down at him, eyes full of hate and something darker, fear disguised as victory. By sundown, huh, he sneered. Looks like it's your grave that's waiting. He kicked the horse hard and rode into the desert, a black shape swallowed by the last band of light. Elias watched him go, chest heaving, blood dripping into the dirt. The town was silent again, except for the lonely creak of the hanging rope swaying in the evening wind. Elias straightened slowly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't call after Clay, didn't curse, didn't chase. Not yet. He simply whispered, voice low and rough as the earth itself. Then we finish it tomorrow. Night fell like a veil across Red Hollow, soft at first, then heavy and absolute. Smoke still clung to the air, the kind that carried the scent of gunpowder and old sins. The wind moved through the empty streets, stirring dust around the bodies that lay where they fell, silent testaments to what vengeance looked like when a man finally came home. Martha Coyle walked barefoot through that silence, her lantern trembling in her hand. Each step kicked up fine red dirt that clung to her hem and the creases of her fingers. She didn't count the dead as she passed them. She couldn't bear to. Her eyes searched only for one thing. She found him where she feared she would, by the church steps, half in the moonlight, half in shadow. Elias lay on his side, one arm stretched toward the door, the other pressed to his ribs where blood had darkened his coat. The earth beneath him looked almost black. Elias, she whispered, dropping the lantern and falling to her knees beside him. Her hands cupped his face, rough palms against stubble and sweat. "You shouldn't have come back." His breath came ragged, slow. But his eyes opened, and even in the dark they held that quiet fire. "Couldn't let them hang my heart," he said. She pressed her forehead to his, eyes wet, words shaking. "You were my heart long before they ever tried." He managed a faint smile, one corner of his mouth lifting like a ghost of the boy she'd raised. "Looks like I kept my promise. They won't touch you again." She looked around them. Bodies sprawled near the well, rifles glinting faintly. The saloon windows were shattered, chairs overturned, curtains swaying like ghosts. The town had no noise left in it, only the creak of the old noose, still swaying from the oak. "Don't talk," she said, trying to press her shawl against his wound. "I'll fetch the doctor." "Don't waste his time," Elias murmured. "Ain't no fix for what's coming." Her throat tightened. "You hush that talk." He took her wrist, his grip still strong despite the weakness in his breath. "Ma, listen. You get out when dawn comes. There's money in my saddlebag, enough to take you east. Find green land, good air. Don't stay here." Her tears streaked the dust on his cheek. "You think I care about money when you're lying here like this?" He tried to chuckle, but it came out as a cough. "You always did have your say." For a while, they sat in silence, the kind that carried the hum of crickets, the cry of a night hawk, and the sound of wind through broken windows. Somewhere, a horse neighed far off. The town wasn't dead yet, just holding its breath. Then came another sound. Hooves. Slow. Deliberate. Martha stiffened. Elias's hand twitched toward his rifle, but it was too far, lying several feet away in the dirt. The sound grew louder, a single rider moving through the remains of Red Hollow, the rhythm of the horse uneven, dragging. Clay Dawson emerged from the darkness, like a ghost who hadn't learned he was dead. His arm was wrapped in blood-soaked cloth, his face pale, lips curled in a cracked grin. "Well," he rasped, sliding down from the saddle. "Look who's still breathing." The giant and his mother. Martha rose slowly, placing herself between Clay and her son. Clay staggered forward, holding his revolver loosely in his hand. "You got a stubborn one, ma'am. Should have let him die clean earlier. Now he'll watch you go first." Elias pushed himself up on one elbow, but his strength failed him. "Clay," he growled, his voice low and broken. "Don't." Clay aimed the gun at Martha's chest. "She raised you, didn't she? Guess she can watch you die the way she watched her husband hang." Something cold and steady snapped inside Martha Coyle. Her hand moved not with fear, but certainty. She knelt once, picked up her son's Winchester from the dirt, and lifted it with surprising ease. Clay blinked, thrown off by the sight of her, a gray-haired widow, barefoot, her nightdress streaked with dust and blood, the barrel of a rifle steady in her hands. "You'll lower that gun," she said softly. Clay laughed. "You wouldn't shoot me. You're a preacher's wife." Her eyes met his. "Not tonight." He fired first, a wild, jerking shot that whined past her shoulder. She didn't flinch. She squeezed the trigger, and the rifle thundered once, echoing down the empty street like judgment. Clay staggered back, confusion washing over his face as the revolver slipped from his grasp. He took one step, then another, before falling hard into the dust. The silence that followed felt almost holy. Martha lowered the rifle, her breath shaking. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then she turned and knelt beside Elias again. His eyes were open, wide with pain and pride all at once. "You did it," he whispered. Her hands trembled. "No, son. You did." The first light of dawn began to rise over the mesas, spilling gold across the rooftops and painting the dust in soft hues of red and amber. One by one, doors creaked open. Faces appeared, weary, stunned, half afraid. The people of Red Hollow stepped into the street and saw what remained. The widow and her son, the outlaws who'd once ruled their days, now lying silent at their feet. No one spoke at first. Then old Harlan the blacksmith removed his hat. Others followed. Even the children, who didn't yet understand what had happened, felt it, that they were seeing something they'd tell their grandchildren about. Elias tried to rise again. Martha helped him, her arm beneath his shoulder. He managed to stand, swaying a little, then looked out over the town. The sun touched his face, and for a moment, he seemed larger than life, a man carved from legend. He took off his hat and laid it on the ground beside him. "For peace," he murmured, so soft only his mother heard. Then he closed his eyes, breathing deep, the light catching the silver locket still hanging around his neck. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain from somewhere far beyond the desert. Martha stood beside him, straight and proud, the rifle in her hand catching the morning light. They say Red Hollow still remembers that day, how one woman and her giant son turned a hanging into a reckoning, how by sundown every outlaw lay at her feet. And though years have washed the dust from the streets, though new hands built new walls and laughter once again filled the saloon, folks still lower their voices when they pass the old oak by the church. They say if the wind's right, you can hear it, the whisper of a rope swaying, the echo of a rifle's last report, and a mother's voice calling softly through the dawn. Not in sorrow, not in fear, but in pride.